To understand the world we live in today, we have to travel back to New York City in 1949. It is a different world. It is a world made of paper and metal. If you walk out of your apartment in Manhattan to buy a newspaper, you pay with a nickel. If you want to buy a suit, you bring a roll of bills. If you want to buy a car, you visit the bank and carry a heavy envelope across town. In 1949, money is physical. It is something you hold, it is something you count, and most importantly, it is something you can run out of. At this time, there is no digital network connecting your bank account to a store. There are no microchips, there is no cloud. Your ability to buy things is tethered to the physical cash in your pocket. Now, credit does exist, but it looks very different from what we have today. And in 1949, credit is personal. It is based on trust. If you go to your local grocery store, the owner knows your face, he knows your wife, he knows where you live. Because he trusts you, he lets you take the milk and eggs today and put it on a tab to pay later. He writes your name in a ledger book behind the counter. This system works perfectly, but it has a major flaw. It has a limit. The moment you leave your neighborhood, that trust disappears. If you travel 10 blocks south to a restaurant where nobody knows you, you are a stranger. The owner there doesn't care if you are honest. He doesn't care if you are rich. He has no way to verify it. To him, your name in a ledger book across town means nothing. In this economy, you are only as wealthy as the cash you are carrying right now. This created a massive friction in the economy. Businessmen, travelers, and wealthy socialites were constantly tethered to banks. They lived in fear of being caught somewhere without their wallet. It was a world waiting for a solution. And that's why you should subscribe to Fleece to uncover stories like this every week. Because sometimes the biggest changes in history come from the smallest annoyances. Enter Frank McNamara. McNamara wasn't a banking genius. He wasn't a computer scientist. He was a businessman who specialized in lending money to people who had trouble paying their bills. He spent his days looking at the gap between what people earned and what they spent. He understood the problem of cash better than anyone. He knew that people often had the money in the bank, but they just didn't have it on them. Frank is a man who enjoys the finer things. He likes good food. He likes entertaining clients. He is part of the New York scene. But Frank has a problem. He is forgetful. And in a cash-only world, being forgetful can be dangerous. The stage is set, the economy is locked in paper, the trust is limited to your local block, and Frank McNamara is about to walk into a restaurant called Major's Cabin Grill and make a mistake that will change the global economy forever. The date is February 1949. The location is Major's Cabin Grill, a popular steakhouse right next to the Empire State Building. Frank McNamara is sitting at a table with two associates. The dinner is going well. They are discussing business. They are eating steaks. The conversation is flowing. In the world of 1949 business, appearances are everything. You have to look successful to be successful. You buy the drinks. You pick up the check. It signals to everyone at the table that you are in control. As the coffee is served, the waiter drops a small paper slip onto the table. The bill. Frank reaches into his suit jacket to grab his wallet. His hand hits empty fabric. He checks his other pocket. Nothing. He checks his pants. Panic sets in. It is a feeling we have all had. The cold sweat. The racing heart. But for Frank, in front of his clients, it is worse than just a mistake. It is a humiliation. In a cash economy, if you cannot pay, you are not just forgetful. You are a fraud. The waiter is waiting. The clients are watching. The history books often dramatize this moment. They call it the First Supper. Some versions of the story say Frank had to wash dishes to pay for the meal. Others say he had to call his wife, who drove into the city in the middle of the night to bring him cash. The reality was likely less dramatic, but the emotional impact was exactly the same. Frank McNamara eventually found a way to pay that night, likely by calling his wife, but the damage was done. He vowed that this would never happen to him again. Most people would have just resolved to remember their wallet next time, but Frank was different. He didn't see this as a personal failure. He saw it as a system failure. Frank realized that the problem wasn't a lack of money. He had plenty of money in his bank account. The problem was access. Why did a man with money in the bank have to feel like a criminal just because he left a piece of leather at home? He started thinking about a solution. He imagined a type of ID card, a card that proved who you were. If he could present this card to the restaurant owner, the owner would know two things. First, that Frank was good for the money. And second, that someone else, a third party, would guarantee the payment. This was the spark. Frank realized that restaurants were losing business because of cash limits. Businessmen were limited by what they carried. If he could remove that limit, people would spend more. He called his lawyer, Ralph Schneider. They sat down and hashed out a plan. They would create a club, a diners club. The concept was simple. The club would issue a cardboard card to its members. The members would show the card at a restaurant. The restaurant would send the bill to the club. The club would pay the restaurant, and then collect the money from the member later. It sounds normal to us today, but in 1949, this was radical. It introduced a stranger into the intimate transaction between a buyer and a seller. Frank returned to Major's Cabin Grill 1 year later, in February 1950. He had a small cardboard card in his hand. When the bill came, he didn't reach for cash. He signed his name on the back of the check and handed the waiter the card. The waiter accepted it. Frank stood up and walked out without opening his wallet. The cash tether was cut. The credit card industry was born. The card Frank McNamara held in his hand at Major's Cabin Grill was not magic. It was cardboard. On the back it listed the 27 restaurants in New York City that had agreed to accept it. At first glance, this looked like a simple convenience, but under the surface, Frank had built an entirely new economic engine. He had introduced a third party into the most basic human transaction. Before this moment, commerce was a straight line. You give money, the merchant gives goods. Frank bent that line into a triangle. Here's how the Diners Club actually worked. When you paid for your steak with the card, you didn't pay the restaurant. You paid Diners Club, and Diners Club paid the restaurant. But there was a catch, a big one. Frank told the restaurant owners, "I will guarantee that every customer pays you, but for that service, I am keeping 7% of the bill." But then, the psychology kicked in. The restaurant owners who did sign up started noticing something strange. When a customer paid with cash, they were careful. They looked at the prices on the right side of the menu. They skipped the appetizer. They ordered the cheaper wine. They were constantly doing mental math, subtracting from the cash in their pocket. But when they pulled out the Diners Club card, the math stopped. Customers with the card stopped looking at the prices. They ordered the shrimp cocktail. They ordered the second bottle of wine. They ordered dessert. Because the pain of paying was pushed into the future, the spending in the present went up. Frank McNamara had discovered the frictionless economy. The data started to come in. The average Diners Club member spent significantly more than the average cash customer. Restaurant owners realized that losing 7% on the bill was irrelevant if the bill itself was 20% or 30% higher. Suddenly, the 7% fee wasn't a tax, it was a marketing cost. This is the moment the interchange fee was born. The grandfather of the fees that power Visa, Mastercard, and American Express today. Frank wasn't just selling convenience to the customer, he was selling wealthy customers to the restaurants. By the end of 1950, just months after starting, Diners Club had 20,000 members. 2 years later, it had 42,000. The third party was no longer an intruder, it was an essential partner. But there was a problem brewing. Frank had built a system for New York businessmen to eat steak, but the world was getting smaller. Air travel was booming. The members didn't just want to eat in Manhattan, they wanted to eat in Paris, London, and Rome. The cardboard card was about to face its biggest test. It needed to go from a local club to a global currency, and to do that it would need a new kind of leader. By 1952, the Diners Club card was successful, but it was fragile. It was still essentially a New York experiment. The card itself was just a piece of cardstock. If you spilled a drink on it, it dissolved. The list of restaurants was printed on the back in tiny font. Frank McNamara had proven the concept, but he was exhausted. He was a man of ideas, not a man of empires. The company was growing too fast for him to handle. To survive, the club needed to become a corporation. It needed someone who didn't just understand money, but understood lifestyle. Enter Alfred Bloomingdale. If Frank McNamara was the anxious businessman forgetting his wallet, Alfred Bloomingdale was the man who never worried about a bill in his life. He was the heir to the Bloomingdale's department store fortune. He was a Hollywood producer. He was friends with Frank Sinatra. Alfred had actually launched a rival card in Los Angeles called Dine and Sign. But he saw the writing on the wall. Two clubs would destroy each other. One club could rule the world. He merged with McNamara, took the reins, and injected the one thing the industry was missing: glamour. Under Bloomingdale, the Diners Club card ceased to be a financial tool. It became a passport. This was the dawn of the jet set era. Commercial flights were connecting Paris, New York, and Los Angeles. A new class of global traveler was emerging. These people had a specific problem. If you traveled to 3 countries in a week, you had to carry francs, pounds, and dollars. You had to visit 3 different currency exchanges. It was a logistical nightmare. Bloomingdale pitched the card as the solution: one world, one card. Suddenly, the cardboard rectangle was the ultimate status symbol. Flashing a Diners Club card didn't just mean you could pay later. It meant you were the kind of person who needed to pay later because you were too busy traveling the world. It was the first time in history that debt was marketed as exclusive. In the past, owing money was shameful. It meant you were poor. But in the 1950s, owing money through a Diners Club card meant you were important. As the membership swelled to hundreds of thousands, a profound psychological shift took place in the American consumer. We call this the decoupling effect. When you pay with cash, the purchase and the payment happen at the exact same second. You feel the loss immediately. But with the card, the purchase happens now. The payment happens later. The pleasure of the dinner is separated from the pain of the bill. This gap, this delay, fueled a spending boom unlike anything the world had ever seen. People began to treat the signature as a magic wand. You signed your name and you got the goods. The bill was a problem for future you. And future you always seemed to have more money than present you. By the mid-1950s, you could use the card to buy flowers, rent cars, and stay in hotels. The third-party system had infiltrated almost every sector of the luxury economy. Frank McNamara passed away in 1957. He died seeing his mistake at Major's Cabin Grill transform into a global phenomenon. But he died before the final and most dangerous evolution took place. You see, Diners Club was a charge card. You had to pay the full bill at the end of every month. It was a convenience, not a loan. But the big banks were watching from the sidelines. They saw the 7% fees. They saw the addiction to spending. And they realized that if they tweaked the model just slightly, they could make money not just on the transaction, but on the time in between. The era of the charge card was ending. The era of revolving debt was about to begin. For the first decade, the card was a tool for the wealthy. It was a convenience. But there was a flaw in the business model. Diners Club and American Express made their money from the annual fee, about $6, and the fees they charged restaurants. They didn't make money from the user's debt. In fact, they demanded you pay the full balance every single month. If you bought a steak, you paid for the steak. But in California, the bankers of Bank of America were watching, and they saw something the others missed. They realized that a customer who pays their bill in full is a good customer, but a customer who doesn't pay their bill is a profitable customer. In September 1958, the town of Fresno, California, woke up to a strange surprise. 60,000 residents went to their mailboxes and found a small plastic card inside. They hadn't applied for it, they hadn't asked for it, it just appeared. This was known as the Fresno Drop. It was a massive gamble. Bank of America simply mailed active credit cards to an entire city of people, trusting them to figure it out. And they did. The residents of Fresno went shopping. This card, which would later become Visa, introduced a new feature that changed the world: revolving credit. Unlike Diners Club, you didn't have to pay the bill at the end of the month. You could pay a little bit now and push the rest to next month. The bank called it flexibility, but in reality, it was a trap. By allowing you to carry a balance, the bank could charge you interest. Suddenly, the product wasn't the plastic card. The product was the debt. This shifted the entire logic of the industry. Diners Club wanted you to be rich, so you could pay them back. Bank of America wanted you to be middle class, so you couldn't pay them back immediately. They invented the minimum payment. It looked like a favor. You only owe $25 today. But mathematically, it was designed to keep you in debt for as long as possible. If you pay only the minimum, a $1,000 television can end up costing you $2,000 over 5 years. The material changed too. The old cardboard cards fell apart. They were temporary. The new cards were made of PVC plastic. They were durable, they were permanent. The plastic card wasn't just a payment method anymore. It was a lifestyle. By the 1970s, the Fresno Drop strategy went national. Banks mailed millions of cards to people across America. They didn't check if you had a job. They didn't check if you could afford it. They just wanted the card in your hand. The stigma of debt vanished. In 1949, Frank McNamara felt shame because he couldn't pay for dinner. By 1979, not being able to pay was normal. It was built into the system. The cash tether was gone, but it was replaced by a debt tether. Instead of being limited by what you had, you were now limited by what you could borrow. And the banks were happy to lend because every dollar you borrowed was a dollar they owned. The trap was set, and we all walked right into it. If you walk into a coffee shop today, you probably won't see much cash. You might not even see a plastic card. You will see people waving their watches. You will see phones tapping against screens. The physical object, the cardboard rectangle that Frank McNamara invented, is slowly disappearing. But the system he built is more powerful than ever. The third party is no longer just a middleman. It is the invisible infrastructure of the entire world. Every time you tap your phone, a signal travels at the speed of light. It goes from the merchant, to a processor, to a bank, and back again. In that split second, the interchange fee is sliced off the top. It is a tax on the global economy that we have all agreed to pay, simply for the privilege of not carrying cash. But there is a deeper cost than just the fee. Frank McNamara invented the card to solve a problem of privacy. He wanted to pay for his dinner without a public scene. He wanted to keep his dignity. The irony is that to solve that problem, he created the ultimate surveillance tool. When you paid with cash in 1949, the transaction was a ghost. Once the money changed hands, no one knew where you were or what you bought. Today, the invisible ledger records everything. The credit card companies know where you eat, they know where you travel, they know if you are sick based on what you buy at the pharmacy. They know you better than you know yourself. We traded our privacy for convenience. We traded the friction of counting bills for the smoothness of the tap. Frank McNamara's mistake at Major's Cabin Grill changed human behavior forever. He proved that humans don't actually like money. We like stuff, and if you can make the money invisible, we will buy more stuff. Today we are all sitting at that table in Major's Cabin Grill. We are enjoying the meal. The conversation is flowing. The wine is good. But unlike Frank, we aren't worried about the bill arriving, because in the modern economy, the bill never really arrives. It just rolls over to next month. And as long as we keep tapping, the dinner never has to end.